Welcome to the Gut Show. I'm Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gutivate, and I will be your host. My goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their guts better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season of the Gut Show, you can expect a weekly conversation covering a hot topic related to health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I'm not your personal dietitian. Everything we cover in this episode is meant to be educational and not a substitute for personalized care from your healthcare team. Welcome, and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to the Gut Show. Today, we are going to talk about a topic that you probably wouldn't expect to talk about when it comes to IBS. I feel like this is one that could easily feel a bit obscure, but as we get into the conversation, I think you're going to see where it's such a valuable point to bring up and something that we all should be kind of reflecting in of ourselves and see, where we need to grieve, where there's history of grief, where we want to give ourselves grace for periods of grief, and how that can impact the body, as well as what is going on in your body can even impact your grieving in that process. So it's a really interesting topic that I've been having conversations with clients about for a really long time, with my community about, and it's something that I've experienced in so many different ways, and have really prioritized learning about as I've gotten older. So it's a topic I'm passionate about. I'm really excited to get to chat about. And I hope that you also are open and ready to kind of participate in the conversation, because like most of the episodes this season, this really is a conversation. It's an open door to think about things differently, to widen perspectives, and to just explore things in ourselves and how things connect, right, with the way that our body is working and functioning, and how our brain is working, how our emotions are responding, all of these different things that can truly impact us day to day. So we'll start by, as always, defining what grief actually is. So grief is considered a natural and normal response to loss or significant life changes, which can include death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, a major illness, the loss of a job. It's a complex and multidimensional process that can include a range of emotions, which might include sadness, anger, guilt, confusion, numbness, but it also will include physical symptoms like fatigue, appetite changes, difficulty sleeping, and pain manifested in different ways in the body. When we're thinking about the overlap of grief and irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS specifically, we know that IBS does impact GI symptoms. So it does manifest in gastrointestinal symptoms like pain, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, those changes in motility. And what we know is that one of the main drivers of IBS is gut-brain miscommunication. That is what we have linked to pain and even the manifestation of symptoms related to certain triggers that others without IBS experience, but don't have the same symptoms with, right? So we know that there's a gut-brain component. So when we're thinking about grief and really anything in our lives that can react or can result in emotional, mental symptoms, right? Anxiety, stress, deep emotion of sadness or confusion and anger, these things that are going to impact this gut-brain communication pathway, then we know that there's going to be a relationship with IBS and with the gut. And those with IBS, since there is a bit of a miscommunication, which some people will refer to it as being an over communication, this response that the body has, it may be heightened. It may be to a more extreme than what someone without IBS or any condition like IBS would experience, which makes it even harder. looking at the research beyond just the, okay, that makes sense, right? It's like, it makes sense how there could be a connection. There is a little bit of evidence that does show that grief and other forms of emotional stress can exacerbate IBS symptoms. This, again, is related to this connection between the gut and the brain. And we think it's due to the body being in a stressed state with this emotional distress. Which is that sympathetic nervous system state where digestive capacity is limited and pain may be heightened. And so there's that kind of relationship there. We also know that there could be a secondary relationship to both sides. So, first, looking at the grief side, when someone is going through grief in whatever way or to whatever thing, right, that they're grieving, that does then turn into action and a response to that grief, which may look like lack of self-care, the inability to do that. We see that a lot in depression linked with grief. It could look like a change in eating habits, which might be binge eating type behaviors on certain foods that maybe feel comforting. We may see lack of eating and restriction or skipped meals because of poor appetite. Some people will have unhealthy coping mechanisms like excess alcohol intake or substance abuse. Some people will do things like over exercise, even of trying to kind of numb the pain through that, or even a more unhealthy version of that, which would be self-harm tendencies. And all of these things can then lead to more IBS symptoms, either due to not supporting the gut, which is what we'll see in terms of lack of self-care or not eating. But we also may see an increased intake of triggers because it's hard to care, right, about that whenever your mind and all of your emotion is now spent in prioritizing this process and what has been lost. And so there's a lot of complex kind of inner web of relationship here and with this. There isn't really any evidence that shows that grief itself does cause IBS. Even when we think about stress, there's not really research that shows specifically that a period of stress causes IBS. However, in experience, I can tell you that many of my clients almost feel like their IBS was triggered by or just turned on. It's like that's where things really began, from a period of either high stress or increased grief, usually linked to the death of a loved one or just the loss, like a deep loss that they experienced that then led to the GI symptoms that, as the emotional response and the grieving process progressed and it improved, the symptoms did not. And that manifested now in this diagnosis of IBS. And I think it's an area that we do really need more research to understand, because we know there's a connection, but we don't necessarily have the pathophysiology, meaning the chain of events that happens when your body is experiencing grief or experiencing a period of stress or prolonged period of stress or even trauma that we've talked about in a past episode. We don't really know the pathophysiology in the body of what happens that then will trigger what we see with IBS, like the change in the gut microbiome and that gut-brain communication and even immune activation. We know it can happen because we see it in practice, but we don't necessarily have the exact answers of why. So we don't also have targeted treatments for that specifically, which can leave the person experiencing it feeling confused, but also feeling like they're in that complex interconnected web that isn't well explained to them and also isn't clear on how to get out of, right? We know that we need to get out of the web, we need to untangle the web, but we don't really know how to do it. Another side of this conversation in this web of complexity is the grief that comes on from chronic illness and a chronic condition like IBS. And I'm speaking to IBS because that is our main focus here with the Gut Show. But I know that so many here don't only have IBS or may not have IBS. Maybe you have IBD, maybe you have endometriosis, maybe there's something else going on. Maybe you have an autoimmune condition. But if you live with a chronic illness that impacts your life day to day, or has impacted your life day to day at some point, there is a period of grief that actually comes on from the condition. And with IBS specifically, what I've seen is, over time, patients will say, I experienced these symptoms, and as they didn't get better, I lost my confidence in my body. I lost my courage to try new things. I lost my ability to experience intimacy, or to feel good about me. Like I lost my body image, right? I lost the way that I saw myself in a positive light. Now my symptoms and the fact that my body isn't working for me anymore, there's a grieving period of the loss of function that you had in your body that now you no longer have. There's also loss that comes along with the symptoms and their impact on your life. We know that those with IBS experience, losing jobs, or even the not getting the promotions, or being pulled back from advancing their careers like they want to. I've talked to so many people with IBS that have decided not to have kids, or they're afraid to, right? They're afraid to start a family because they don't know if they would be able to take care of a child because of their symptoms, or also what pregnancy and delivering a child would look like and do to their bodies, right? Because if their bodies haven't functioned, why would they trust that process that's really demanding on the body to go well, right? I've heard, many with IBS say they've lost relationships, like friendships have fallen apart because of lack of support, or even just the inability to be consistent with schedules, especially whenever symptoms aren't managed and you don't know what's going on, right? That can be really tough. If you go through a period of depression or increased fear or anxiety due to your symptoms, that also will strain, all relationships, and can put a strain on that, even with family relationships that have been around, since you were born. That can still be something that you lose, and can feel like a true loss, almost like a death, right? Because it's kind of stripped away from you. I've seen athletes lose their ability to compete at a high level because of their symptoms. Their body just can't take the intensity anymore, and they lose the career that they wanted. Or I've met with, people who've been in college sports that have had to step back and even sacrifice scholarships and the community and the team piece of that. And that's a huge part of their identity. Also, IBS it kind of can take over. Any chronic illness can take over your identity, because it's all you can focus on for a period of time, right? You're going to appointments, you're logging, you are seeking out help, you're trying new things. Your entire life can easily become about what's going on in your body and trying to figure that out. And in some cases, that can progress to things like obsession, or even eating disorders, or even in some cases could possibly progress to things like OCD, or obsessions with what you are doing and experiencing, and how you're living your life. And that can result in a loss of your identity, your personality, the things that you did enjoy before. And so there's a lot of grieving that often comes on as a result of IBS that is very rarely talked about, or even given space to be talked about, because healthcare providers that maybe are the only people you're even talking about your condition with, they don't have time, right? There's no time in those appointments, nor do they always have their own mental and emotional capacity to hold space, or maybe they don't even have that expertise and training in that area, right? They don't have the tools to support you. And so there's that lack of kind of openness or even opportunity to explore this. So I want to talk about how we can support the grieving process. And I want to talk about it from the lens of both grief that's unrelated to your IBS that will be impacting your symptoms, but also the grief that is coming on because of your IBS, and maybe because of your symptoms and what you have experienced. In either scenario, grief is a human experience. grief is part of common humanity. We all experience grief. No one is likely, I don't know if this is even possible, no one is going to make it through life without experiencing grief, especially those who've lived a full life, right? If you've lived a life, you've experienced grief at some point, or you likely will, because that is the nature of life. There is loss, there is disappointment, people die and they leave us, right? They're taken away. Tragedy happens. You may be grieving tragedies on a social impact scale or justice scale. Like there's a lot of grieving that happens in life. And grieving is actually a good thing because it does show that you have compassion, that you have love, that you had connection, right? And if you've had it before, you can have it again. It means that there was something good. And that is why it is so difficult to process the loss and letting it go. I have experienced this myself. So some of the tips I'm going to share are things I've learned, but there are also going to be things that you know and maybe that you've learned or that others that you love and are part of your communities that they've learned. And so the goal here is not just telling you exactly what you have to do, but opening up the ideas and the options that may be available to you so that you can support your body through the process of grieving, actually grieve, because ignoring grief only prolongs it. It doesn't actually make it go away. You have to go through it for it to go away. That's so important. And that's what we want to do. And grieving effectively and intentionally can also help prevent some of the symptoms that are coming along with it. All right. So what are some ways that you can deal with grief? The first thing is allow yourself to truly feel and experience all of the emotions that are coming up. Whenever my dad passed away, I was in my last year of college, my senior year, last semester, and he passed away of lung cancer. So it was a process that we were all very much a part of and was kind of impending, right? Which is very hard. During the process, like from him being diagnosed with lung cancer, we found it and realizing kind of that time where we realized, okay, the treatment isn't working. It's not going to work, right? We were kind of given this is going to be it message. That from then to his passing away, that took around 4 months. During that 4 months, I did not allow myself to feel. I very much compartmentalized because I had to survive my last year of college. I had to just get through. I had some things I needed to see success in for the next steps in my career. And I really did block off all of my emotions that I felt and became kind of like a zombie, but also very productive, right? Because I was trying to refocus that energy. Whenever he passed away, I realized very quickly that what I was doing to try to survive actually robbed me of experiencing a deeper connection with him and a deeper connection with myself through the loss process. So I very quickly saw that. And so I had a moment. I remember I was outside with my dogs in the fence. I've always connected with my dogs as like a communication tool, right? Because they're the best creatures on the planet. And I sat outside and I was just talking through this with the dog and realized, okay, I'm not feeling my emotions. And I am realizing now, because him passing away kind of opened up the dam, right? It opened up everything that I had suppressed and put away. And I think that I recognized that this is going to destroy me if I don't let it out. And so I committed to, from that point on, and my grieving process of the loss, that I would feel every emotion. And I would allow myself the freedom to feel them and to feel them in a way that felt safe for me. That didn't mean feeling them to every single person or having to, trauma dump on people. Like I didn't do that. What I did do is create space for myself to cry, to get angry, to be frustrated, to scream if I needed to laugh if I needed to, hysterically, like whatever I needed to feel, I felt. And while grieving does not happen in a linear way, and there's not like a journey where it's like, oh, you're done grieving and it's all over. If you've experienced loss, grief lasts a very long time. And I'm this loss specifically, I'm in that for almost 8 years now. Oh no, 9 years now. It's not better necessarily. Like the initial stage of it, where every day was an outpouring of emotion, yeah, that's not happening anymore. But grieving takes on new forms as we get further away from the loss, depending on the loss that you've experienced. And the loss that you've experienced with a health condition can be the same way. It's likely not just going to go away. But when you're able to express your emotions, whenever you're able to really feel them and give yourself that freedom to let it out and experience it, they're no longer eating away at you or bubbling up to then explode at the worst possible moment, right? When they're experienced, sometimes that's all we need to then move forward, right? And so this may be done through support, like maybe through therapy, if you need kind of guidance in that, if you're not sure how to even access your emotions or what's going on or those thoughts. But this may be done in a different way. Maybe it's done through music, through dancing, through art. Maybe it's done through exercise. Again, we want to make sure we're actually expressing and not just masking. But for some people, that's where that happens. Maybe it is done through just talking to yourself. Maybe it's done through what you would think it would be done through, right? Crying, screaming, like verbally kind of letting it out and like kind of manifesting in that physical way. Allowing yourself to feel emotions does not have to look one way. It can be personal to you. The second thing that you'll want to do is get support wherever you can. So like I mentioned before, maybe therapy can help, but you can also find support from friends, from a family member, from a support group. There are a lot of amazing support groups out there that can provide incredible support. But the goal with support, it's not because you need someone else, right? It's not to be dependent on that support system in a way that you're not able or capable of experiencing it and moving through it yourself. That's not the goal of support. Grief itself is isolating. And what oftentimes will happen when you're experiencing grief is that you isolate yourself to the degree where now there's increased fear of leaving that safe space. There's lack of joy. There are no next steps, right? Because now you've shut down all of the parts of your life. And momentarily, that may be what you do. But to start opening your life back up, you have to find support. You have to get out of that isolated place. And the way to do that best is with people who understand, people who have walked through that before, or people who are qualified, like a professional, to help you walk through that, right? You don't want to just get support from someone who's there to say, I feel sorry for you, or, just there. Like that is nice and that's helpful. But the support that you want to get when you are going through a grieving process is from those who truly get it. So if you've lost, let's say, I'll go back to my personal example with losing my dad. My sister became a huge support. We became very close because we both experienced the same thing. And even as we have progressed through our grieving, my sister understands when I hit a milestone in my life, the fact that my dad's not there, that's a continual grieving process. She gets it. So we can connect. And that's a support system I can find where I don't isolate myself and kind of hide only in my emotions, right? I don't want to sulk in my emotions and that's it. I want to make sure I'm processing. And then I have the support from someone to say, yeah, that really sucks, and validate that experience, because that alone can be helpful. I need someone to say, you know what, I know that sucks. we also are going to move through it, or here's something that we can do, or remember this memory. There are things that people who get it can help you with that those who don't get it may not be able to. When it comes to a chronic health condition like IBS, there are some like grief support groups that are for people with illness. There's a lot for people who've been diagnosed with cancer. That's a very common area of support. But you can find different areas, and it doesn't have to be an IBS specific support group. Maybe it is one that's tailored to those with other chronic disease states, and that may still be a good support system for you. Or even certain communities, maybe you find people that maybe you align with in comment sections, message them, connect with them, and see if you can find people who have been walking the same path as you, or could possibly be a couple of steps ahead in their journey, and they would be a great support system for you to lean on. Another thing that you want to do when you're experiencing grief, and one thing that can help, and it sounds silly, but take care of yourself. This is active. Taking care of yourself on the very basic level is not going to feel natural. It's not going to be habitual like it was before you were in a state of grief. Grief is physically and emotionally exhausting, and it can be really easy for sleep to go down, for meals to completely go out the window, and eating to be missed. It can also be common that hygiene is lacking, right? Some people will be experiencing grief and can say, I haven't showered in days. Haven't even looked in the mirror, right? Because you're so deep in what you're feeling and in the exhaustion of the processing and everything that's going on, that it can be so challenging to do the basic things that your body needs. When you are not taking care of yourself, all of those things that you're experiencing with grief get worse, right? You're more isolated, you're more stressed, you're more depressed, right? You feel lower. You don't feel good about yourself. Your energy is tanked. You're not going to sleep well, right? So in a period of grief, or when you are grieving, it can be challenging, but it's also very much needed to take care of yourself. And what can help really well is making kind of a list of like, these are the daily things I need to do, and kind of almost forcing yourself with some accountability from, again, your support system to do them. Brush your teeth, wash your face, take a shower, go for a walk, move your body, right? Do what you need to do. Eat your 3 meals. You have to do those things to process through and care for yourself, so that on the other side of the height of your grief, you're in a place where your body is actually ready to move forward, instead of being at a place where now you have to deal with the depression. Now you have to deal with how unbalanced your body feels, right? Your energy is low. Maybe you are kind of malnourished in a way. You're dehydrated. Your gut is all over the place and you feel awful. Being in that physical state makes things harder. So taking care of yourself, as hard as it is and as active as it has to be, right? It's not easy to do. That will help you move through it easier and more wholly, right? You can't have a baby if you don't take care of yourself. You can't run a marathon if you don't take care of yourself. Grieving is also physically demanding. You have to take care of yourself to make it through, right? On top of that, it is so important whenever you're going through grief to practice mindfulness. And this goes along with the idea of, feeling and really processing your emotions. But mindfulness is your connection to the present. So in your connection to the present moment, you are connecting to, what are the thoughts? What are the emotions? What am I experiencing in this moment, right? What's going on right now? That's a huge part of it. What you're also experiencing with mindfulness, though, is that connection to the present. Oftentimes, grief is a connection to the past, right? Because we're thinking about what is lost. Sometimes it can also be a connection to the future of things will never be the same, or how do I move forward? What does life look like without this person or this piece of my life? What's typically missing in grieving is the present. It's important to acknowledge the past. It's important to look at the future, again, to explore what's going on in your mind. It's also important to come back to your present moment. As simple as your environment. Simply engaging your senses. Again, go for a walk, look at your environment, feel your body, like press your feet into the floor, press your hands into the different parts of your body and say, I am here, I'm in this present moment. You can also utilize mind-body exercises and kind of mindfulness practices like yoga. Sometimes are really helpful for this, breathing exercises, guided meditations, anything that will help you connect back to your present moment. This will also help reduce some of those feelings of anxiety or overwhelm, which aren't necessarily the emotions themselves, right? And so reducing the anxiety and overwhelm will help you connect more to what are the true emotions going on here? Like, what are the things that I am really actually processing through, not just the anxiety of what I'm not doing or the overwhelm of all the things that are going on, right? That can be really, really helpful. And then the last thing, and this is more as you're moving through grief, to allow yourself to continually grieve in a healthy way where it's not building up or even being completely ignored, then leading to maybe guilt or shame that you've completely ignored this part of your life, especially if it's a lost like loved one. This is really important, but even the life you had before, again, this grieving is lifelong. It's a continual process. So to honor that, it can be helpful to create rituals, create space where you will honor the memory of the loved one, the memory of the thing in your life that maybe does feel lost, if that connects, right? Some loss doesn't require this, but this can help you feel connected to what had been lost while still moving forward. And again, it can take away some of that guilt, and it can take away that underlying pain and frustration and emotion that is suppressed because it hasn't had a space to be let out or be processed. This could be a birthday. This could be, with a lost loved one, going to a cemetery once a year or however often. It can look different for you. Maybe you have a memento in your home where that reminds you of that person or that thing, and you honor that, and you honor the memories, you honor what you loved, you honor the experiences that you had, you honored what you learned in those spaces in order to connect to that and bring that person back into your present moment, right? Bring that person or that thing into your future life. With IBS, and with grieving what was lost in your life, a shift here is actually engaging back into those things in any way that you can. So, for example, if your IBS has taken you away from a sport, like you were an athlete, engaging in that sport to the fullest capacity may not be available for you where you are, right? But what you can do is find a way to engage and still honor what you love about that sport. And that might be hosting parties and watching shows, or just watching the sport, right? Going to the games and like the live sport. It may be helping coach the sport, right? And being in a place where you can teach others. It may be playing the sport or doing the sport in a leisurely way where you have the ability to pull back and take breaks and do what you need to do physically to still enjoy it, connect to your body with that, but also honor where your body is, and show that compassion to yourself. That's an example. With your career, it may be the same way, where if you're in a place where your IBS is still interfering with your work, finding the space where when you're not having symptoms, okay, I'm going to really give this like my all. I'm going to go for it, right? I have this kind of ritual set up, or I have this ability where I'm not just saying, okay, overall I'm held back, and so there's no point in trying anymore, but instead I'm going to bring this into the present. What were my major goals, and how can I work towards those or develop my career in a different way when the symptoms are low and when I have that ability to, on my own terms, and create that for myself. Even if I don't hit the goals I wanted to or get the promotion I wanted, how can I still engage in that in a way that feels impactful, meaningful, and successful for me where I am? Engaging back into the things that you feel like you've lost requires a lot of grace and a lot of self-compassion, because it may not look like the way that it looked in the past, right? It may not always go well. It may be challenging. There may be a lot of fear, right? There's a lot that's going to go on. You may fail, and that is so disappointing. And so your body needs self-compassion. Your body needs grace. I hope this conversation was helpful. I know this is an area, again, I've experienced, I continue to experience, and I've also walked with so many clients through. So I know how hard it can be, but I do hope that the conversation has opened up maybe even that grace, right, that we talked about, some awareness of what possibly has been going on that you haven't actually put a name to or fully given attention to. That's always the first step. And that would be something to pull into in this moment, right? Grab a journal, go for a walk and talk through it, right? Whatever you need to do to like actually process what is coming up and what you're thinking. And then if you want to share what's going on, would love to hear that through social media, our Facebook group. All of that's found in the show notes if you're interested in sharing your perspectives and experience and what you've learned. We would love to hear that and share that with the community. Hope that you join us for our final episode of the season next week, where we're going to talk about picky eating, which will be a very interesting topic and one that most of us with IBS experience in some way. So we are going to dive deeper into that as we close down this season of the Gut Show. And then we'll come back at the end of the year. So thank you for being part of the season so far. And I hope to see you on our final episode next week. Have you enjoyed these deep dive conversations on these specific topics that overlap with digestion and IBS and other digestive disorders or conditions? If so, then you may love the Gutivate blog. On our blog, we have broken down topics ranging from actual management strategies for different symptoms, overlapping conditions, and also some of these less talked about topics that a lot of our patients and those in our community have brought up and have wondered about. So if you like to read different topics, see different sources, and just get a new perspective on these varying topics, then you want to check out gutivate.com/blog.